Arthur C. Clarke is famous for having said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, at least to the perceiver who has not yet fully experienced that particular technology and has not integrated it into his or her everyday routine. Another way of thinking about this is something that one of my graduate students said just last week. She said, beware of shiny things. Shiny things, like these very powerful tools that can be sufficiently indistinguishable from magic. Unfortunately, because these tools are so powerful, and because we are so hopeful that they can help our students and ourselves to accomplish the kinds of educational reform that we would like to see in our classrooms and our schools and our communities, we can overascribe the power of these particular tools. We can fail to distinguish them, as a matter of fact, as Clarke suggested, from magic. But of course, they're not magic. And even more importantly, we can overascribe our students' abilities to be able to manipulate these tools with apparent and complete ease compared to ourselves. You've heard, I'm sure, of our students being referred to as digital natives, that somehow because of when they were born, relative to those of us who are, say, over 30 or 35, that somehow magically our students are that much more adept, that much more knowledgeable about using digital tools and resources for their learning. This assumption of digital natives versus digital immigrants is illustrated well in this commercial that aired a few years ago.
Shut it down. Okay. All right.
Suki, もう寝る時間よ。
はい。
How secure is your business? UBS. Security solved.
Of course, we'd like to believe that our students are digital natives of the type that Suki in the commercial seemed to be. But of course, though our students may have had more experience outside of school using things like social networking tools, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of our students have had access, certainly not equal access. And even for our students who have had a lot of access to all kinds of digital tools and resources outside of our classrooms, it does not necessarily mean that they know how to use those tools well in pursuit of curriculum-based learning. As a matter of fact, quite a number of recent research studies are demonstrating exactly this point, that even students from very affluent homes who have had exposure and experience with digital tools and resources for all of their lives are not necessarily entering universities prepared to use these tools in their learning. In the same way that teachers need to learn how to teach with these tools, in addition to learning how to operate them, our students need to learn from us how best to learn with these tools in ways that support curriculum-based learning outcomes. So in our conversation online, there were many comments about powerful educational technology use and many comments about educational reform. What's fascinating to me is the intersection between educational technology use in classrooms, which doesn't necessarily imply a different way, certainly not a reforming way of teaching and or learning, and educational reform, which does focus upon changing fundamentally how learners learn and how we as teachers help them to learn, how we teach in our classrooms. So if you think about it, what often happens, and this has been true for the 30 plus years that digital tools and resources have been used in classrooms actively, what often happens is that these two rather different ways of thinking about and addressing technology integration are conflated. There is educational technology use that is progressive, that is in line with educational reform, and there's educational technology use that supports a more traditional or standard way of teaching and learning. There is nothing inherent in using digital tools and resources to help students to learn that would necessarily cause a fundamental change in how students learn and or how teachers teach. So if our goals are to accomplish educational reform, it is absolutely possible for technology use to assist that reform. It is not necessarily guaranteed, though, that if we help students to use digital tools and resources in our classrooms, even pervasively, that will necessarily lead to educational reform. What does educational reform sound like, seem like, look like to the participants in our virtual forum during the past 2 weeks? I've taken just 4 brief examples from the many, many thoughtful comments that have been offered. These 4 examples represent 4 common ideas that were expressed. Perhaps I should call them instead hopes that were expressed by participants who were communicating together. In this first example, student involvement is emphasized. This particular participant said that educational quality would include involving students in the development of curricular goals and in contributing suggestions and ideas on how to conduct learning activities, so that the students feel their views of things have been taken into account. From here, it's possible to increase learning quality for students, as they would no longer be passive learners, but active learners, since they would be given the chance to put forward criteria to help them feel more committed to their learning. Another theme that was expressed had to do with teachers collaborating, working in teams. One person, for example, said, teachers must be united, exchange ideas, engage in teamwork, motivate each other, and those who are not interested will carry on working as always, or should something be done to rescue them? This particular last point was discussed at some length. Another theme had to do with the social contexts in which our students live and in which our schools exist, and the importance for learning within our classrooms to be realistic in terms of those contexts, to recognize the contexts in which the students and we are immersed outside of the classroom, to bring those contexts into the classroom. So this person said, for example, in order to implement TPACK, it is appropriate to begin with a reflection among teachers regarding the needs and characteristics of the social context in this day and age. In addition, curriculum content must focus on student needs within their life context. We think of this as authentic learning, learning that has value not only within the school and within the classroom, but that can transfer well, can help to empower students outside of school, outside of the time that they spend in our classrooms. And the last example, a participant says, we have the chance to learn throughout our lifetimes. We have to defend the free circulation of knowledge and equality, as well as the inclusion of all parties in accessing it. This notion of equal accessibility, of information being available to all, is extremely important. So it seems to me that many of our participants, if not most of the participants in the virtual forum online, we're looking to educational technologies to help to forward the kind of pervasive and rich and deep kinds of educational reform that many see as absolutely essential to developing 21st century skills and awarenesses. Though I share the hope and the commitment to these goals, I would like to suggest an important caution. The conflation of technology integration, that is, using technologies to help students to learn, that conflation with educational reform actually can help us to overestimate what educational technologies can actually help us and our students to do. Since educational technology use can be done with any teaching approach, educational technology use within the classroom in and of itself will not affect educational reform. If our goal is to reform one or more aspects of how our students learn and how our teachers teach in the pervasive ways suggested by many participants in our online discussion, then my strong suggestion is that we focus on the reform and perhaps use some digital tools and resources to help us to effect the reform, if appropriate. Instead, if what we want to focus upon is helping students and their teachers to better use educational technologies, my suggestion is to uncouple these two ideas. Educational technology integration can happen with any and all approaches to teaching and learning. Educational reform can happen without the assistance of digital tools and resources, but used together, perhaps we have a very powerful set of potentials for South America and for the rest of the world. Thanks for your participation in our virtual exchange. Thanks especially for thinking with me, and I hope to see you in Santiago. Just last week, she said, beware of shiny things. Shiny things, like these very powerful tools that can be sufficiently indistinguishable from magic. Unfortunately, because these tools are so powerful, and because we are so hopeful that they can help our students and ourselves to accomplish the kinds of education. Arthur C. Clarke is famous for having said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, at least to the perceiver who has not yet fully experienced that particular technology and has not integrated it into his or her everyday routine. Another way of thinking about this is something that one of my graduate students said, relate these tools with apparent and complete ease compared to ourselves. You've heard, I'm sure, of our students being referred to as digital natives, that somehow because of when they were born, relative to those of us who are, say, over 30 or 35, that somehow magically our students are that much more adept, that much more knowledgeable about educational reform that we would like to see in our classrooms and our schools and our communities. We can overascribe the power of these particular tools. We can fail to distinguish them, as a matter of fact, as Clark suggested, from magic. But of course, they're not magic. And even more importantly, we can overascribe our students' abilities to be able to manipulate using digital tools and resources for their learning. This assumption of digital natives versus digital immigrants is illustrated well in this commercial that aired a few years ago.
Shut it down. Okay, totally.